What if I told you that some of history's most infamous women were born into cycles of deadly inbreeding, products of dynasties so twisted that their own children were often their half-siblings? Their stories are dark, disturbing, and reveal the horrifying consequences of power intertwined with genetic decay. Tonight, we delve into the sinister world of inbred queens, where incest bred madness and sometimes death. For centuries across the opulent courts and shadowy castles of Europe, an unspoken horror festered within the very heart of power, the relentless pursuit of pure blood through incestuous unions. From the medieval ages to the cusp of modernity, royal and noble houses, in their pathological obsession with maintaining control and consolidating vast territories, routinely arranged marriages within their own immediate families. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and in some truly grotesque instances, even half-siblings shared the marriage bed. This wasn't driven by desire or affection, but by a chilling calculus of power, a desperate bid to hoard wealth, land, and influence within an ever-shrinking genetic pool. The belief was that divine right flowed in their veins, and to dilute this sacred essence with outside blood was to risk not just losing face, but losing everything. Yet, this divine blood fixation had a tragically ironic outcome. These very genes, so fiercely protected, became weapons of self-destruction. The consequences were not abstract political maneuverings, but tangible, horrifying realities etched onto human faces and minds. Tales of hereditary madness became whispers in the grand halls as kings and queens descended into fits of rage, melancholia, or terrifying delusions. Physical deformities, once dismissed as individual misfortunes, began to appear with alarming regularity across generations: misshapen jaws, protruding chins, stunted growth, or weakened limbs. Bizarre deaths, marked by chronic illnesses and unexplained ailments, plagued these inbred lineages, shortening lives that were meant to be long and glorious. It was a slow, agonizing genetic decay, a creeping rot that undermined the very foundations of the dynasties it was designed to protect. The glittering facade of absolute power often concealed a grim stage where genetic lottery tickets were drawn, usually revealing a losing hand. These women, destined for thrones from birth, were often the most profound victims of this system. They were born into a legacy of power, but also into a terrifying genetic trap, their bodies and minds bearing the indelible marks of their families' desperate quest for dominance. We're not simply talking about historical curiosities. These are the deeply unsettling accounts of lives distorted and destroyed by a practice born of greed and hubris. The glittering facade of absolute power often concealed a grim stage where genetic lottery tickets were drawn, usually revealing a losing hand. These women, destined for thrones from birth, were often the most profound victims of this system. They were born into a legacy of power, but also into a terrifying genetic trap, their bodies and minds bearing the indelible marks of their families' desperate quest for dominance. Their stories serve as grim reminders of the brutal consequences when power is pursued at the cost of human health and sanity. Understanding the insidious creep of this genetic curse requires a descent into the very mechanics of royal succession and the prevailing beliefs of the time. The concept of purity of blood, though later twisted into racial ideologies, initially served as a bedrock for aristocratic claims to legitimacy. Marrying within one's own class, and ideally within one's own family, was seen not as a taboo, but as a strategic imperative. It was believed to consolidate land, prevent the dispersion of wealth, and crucially maintain a perceived divine lineage. The more pure the bloodline, the stronger the claim to the throne, and the less likely noble families were to challenge marriages that expanded the power of a rival house. Yet, shrouded beneath the velvet and gold of courtly life, were the earliest signs of this horrific price. Long before genetic science could articulate the concept of recessive genes, astute observers noted recurring patterns of illness, eccentricity, and physical abnormalities within these tightly knit family trees. Consanguineous marriages drastically increased the likelihood of offspring inheriting two copies of harmful recessive genes, genes that, when present in only one copy, might lie dormant, but unleashed their devastating effects when paired. This translated into a grim parade of suffering, higher rates of infant mortality, chronic diseases, weakened immune systems, and susceptibility to various ailments that baffled court physicians. The psychological toll was equally, if not more, profound. The line between eccentric royal behavior and outright madness often blurred, but contemporary accounts frequently describe episodes of severe depression, paranoia, violent outbursts, and debilitating neuroses among inbred royalty. Could a king's irrational decree be attributed to divine inspiration or genetic predispositions? Was a queen's melancholy a romantic temperament or a symptom of inherited mental instability? These questions, though unanswerable in their own time, now resonate with a chilling clarity. The isolation of royal life, coupled with severe physical and mental handicaps, created lives of profound loneliness and anguish for many of these individuals, particularly the women, whose primary purpose was to produce healthy heirs, a task increasingly difficult for those bearing the burden of a genetic curse. The psychological toll was equally, if not more, profound. The line between eccentric royal behavior and outright madness often blurred, but contemporary accounts frequently describe episodes of severe depression, paranoia, violent outbursts, and debilitating neuroses among inbred royalty. Could a king's irrational decree be attributed to divine inspiration or genetic predispositions? Was a queen's melancholy a romantic temperament or a symptom of inherited mental instability? These questions, though unanswerable in their own time, now resonate with a chilling clarity. The isolation of royal life, coupled with severe physical and mental handicaps, created lives of profound loneliness and anguish for many of these individuals, particularly the women, whose primary purpose was to produce healthy heirs, a task increasingly difficult for those bearing the burden of a genetic curse. The stage was set for a dark pattern that would define some of Europe's most powerful families. Perhaps no family demonstrates the horrifying physical manifestations of relentless inbreeding more notoriously than the Habsburgs. For centuries, this dynastic powerhouse dominated vast swathes of Europe, from Spain to Austria, meticulously arranging marriages to expand their influence and preserve their bloodline's purity. But a silent, grotesque price was paid for this power in the form of what became known as the Habsburg jaw, a pronounced mandibular prognathism, where the lower jaw protruded grotesquely, often to the point of severe malocclusion, making eating and speaking difficult. Imagine the grand portraits of Habsburg monarchs. Beneath the regal robes and elaborate wigs, a distinct, almost caricatured facial deformity appears again and again across generations. From Emperor Maximilian I to Charles II of Spain, the Habsburg jaw became an unmistakable genetic trademark, a living testament to the family's obsessive endogamy. This was not a subtle trait, it was an extreme physical manifestation that often made normal facial closure impossible and breathing difficult. While largely a facial deformity, it was a striking visual symbol of the broader genetic weakening coursing through their veins. Beyond the jaw, the Habsburgs also suffered from a litany of other inherited ailments. High rates of infant mortality plagued the family, as did a susceptibility to disease that often cut short the lives of otherwise powerful rulers. Charles II of Spain serves as a particularly tragic example. Born with a severe form of the Habsburg jaw, he was also plagued by a host of debilitating physical and mental disabilities. He was frail, sickly, and intellectually delayed, barely able to walk or speak coherently for much of his childhood. His premature death at 39, leaving no heir, directly led to the War of the Spanish Succession, a continent-spanning conflict, a stark reminder that the consequences of inbreeding were not just personal tragedies, but could reshape the geopolitical landscape. The Habsburg story is a chilling visual lesson in hereditary decay. Their portraits, from the subtly afflicted to the severely deformed, provide a direct, albeit silent, dialogue with the past, showcasing the physical degradation that accompanied their relentless pursuit of power through kinship marriage. But they were not alone in this grim genetic gamble. The Habsburg story is a chilling visual lesson in hereditary decay. Their portraits, from the subtly afflicted to the severely deformed, provide a direct, albeit silent, dialogue with the past, showcasing the physical degradation that accompanied their relentless pursuit of power through kinship marriage. But they were not alone in this grim genetic gamble. Other powerful dynasties faced their own unique forms of inbred fragility. Consider the House of Bourbon, particularly the French branch that ascended to the pinnacle of power under the Sun King, Louis XIV. While perhaps not as visually striking with a singular, pervasive physical deformity like the Habsburg jaw, the Bourbon lineage, through generations of strategic cousin marriages, accumulated its own genetic burden. The consequences manifested primarily in a marked fragility among its heirs, contributing to significant political instability and individual tragedy. Louis XIV, a monarch obsessed with the grandeur and continuity of his line, encouraged marriages that kept power tightly confined within the Bourbon family and its most closely allied branches. His successor, Louis XV, himself a product of such unions, experienced repeated tragedies within his own immediate family, losing several children and potential heirs to illnesses that today might be linked to weakened immune systems. The Grand Dauphin, Louis's only legitimate son to survive childhood, died young, followed shortly by his own eldest son and grandson, wiping out 3 generations of direct heirs in a tragic succession of illnesses. This left a sickly, young Louis XV to inherit the throne, profoundly impacting the stability of the monarchy. The most tragic symbol of Bourbon inbreeding's mental toll might be found in later generations, leading up to the French Revolution. While direct forensic evidence is scant, the historical accounts of mental instability, melancholy, and intellectual deficiencies among certain Bourbon figures are strikingly consistent. The sheer weight of hereditary ailments, both physical and psychological, created a lineage of fragile monarchs and regents, many of whom were ill-equipped to handle the immense pressures of governance. This hidden fragility at the heart of the most powerful monarchy in Europe contributed to a sense of disconnect and weakness that would ultimately culminate in the seismic upheavals of the late 18th century. These aren't just isolated anecdotes. They represent an observable pattern of genetic degradation. The repeated intermarriage meant that harmful recessive alleles, when they did emerge, were more likely to find a match and express themselves in the phenotype, the observable characteristics, of the unfortunate individuals born into these lines. And while the male monarchs often bear the brunt of historical scrutiny, it was the royal women frequently moved like pawns across the European chessboard, whose bodies and minds bore the silent, profound suffering of this misguided dynastic strategy. They were the biological vehicles for the continuation of these pure lines, bearing children who were increasingly frail, deformed, or mentally afflicted. Let us now turn our attention to one such woman, a figure who, though perhaps a composite drawn from many tragic historical examples, embodies the devastating physical and mental toll exacted by this relentless pursuit of power through inbreeding. Let us call her Maria de la Paz. She was born into a world of gilded cages and suffocating expectations, a princess whose very name, meaning of peace, mocked the internal tempest of her existence. Her lineage was a dizzying tangle of family trees, branches wrapped around themselves like strangling vines, a testament to generations of cousin-to-cousin, uncle-to-niece marriages designed to consolidate power and keep pure blood flowing. From early childhood, it was evident that Maria bore the profound marks of this genetic isolation. While specific features varied in history's figures, for Maria, the signs were cruelly pronounced. Perhaps a subtle distortion in her facial features, a slight asymmetry, or a too narrow jaw that echoed the Habsburgs, yet was distinctly her own. More significant and far more debilitating were her physical frailties. She was prone to chronic illnesses, her immune system seemingly compromised from birth, making every common cold a life-threatening ordeal. Her limbs were often weak, her gait unsteady, rendering courtly dances and strenuous activities impossible for her. Her delicate frame seemed perpetually exhausted, drained from the invisible battle raging within her very cells. But it was the insidious decline of her mental state that truly marked her existence as a tragedy. As a young woman, she was described as quiet, withdrawn, her eyes often holding a distant, haunted quality. As she matured, periods of profound melancholy would descend upon her without warning, turning days into an endless grey fog. These melancholic spells often escalated into episodes of severe agitation, irrational fears, and eventually frightening delusions. Whispers among the court physicians spoke of hereditary madness, a term used to vaguely describe conditions that today we might recognize as severe depression, anxiety disorders, or even early-onset psychosis, all exacerbated, if not directly caused, by the genetic vulnerabilities passed down through her inbred line. Maria became an increasingly isolated figure. Her deformity, though perhaps subtle to the casual observer, was amplified by the constant, agonizing awareness she had of it. This, coupled with her unpredictable mental states, meant fewer and fewer courtiers dared to approach her. Her purpose, like all royal women, was to secure the line through marriage and produce heirs. Yet, who would marry such a fragile, tormented soul? Her very existence became an awkward, unspoken secret, a living testament to the dark side of dynastic ambition. Her chamber, once a hub of activity, slowly became a quiet sanctuary, then a prison. She found solace only in the shadows, her once vibrant gowns replaced by somber colors, her life's flame flickering with a disturbing, erratic rhythm towards an inevitable, early end. Her story, a composite of so many real royal women, lays bare the silent suffering inflicted by the relentless pursuit of power at any genetic cost. Her chamber, once a hub of activity, slowly became a quiet sanctuary, then a prison. She found solace only in the shadows, her once vibrant gowns replaced by somber colors, her life's flame flickering with a disturbing, erratic rhythm towards an inevitable early end. Her story, a composite of so many real royal women, lays bare the silent suffering inflicted by the relentless pursuit of power at any genetic cost. This profound personal tragedy was not an isolated incident, but a pervasive theme in these inbred dynasties. Beyond the fictional Maria, history offers its own haunting examples of women whose lives became tragic symbols of inbreeding's brutal toll. While not always defined by extreme physical grotesqueness, their suffering, both physical and psychological, was undeniably shaped by their genetically compromised origins. Born in 1734, her lineage was a dense tapestry of intermarriage, particularly within the Portuguese House of Braganza and its various European royal connections. Her father, Joseph I, was her double first cousin through both his mother and father. This astonishing level of consanguinity set the stage for a life marked by profound mental illness. Upon ascending the throne in 1777, Maria I was initially seen as a capable and devout monarch. However, her reign became increasingly overshadowed by a severe decline in her mental health. She began suffering from periods of deep melancholy, intense anxiety, and bouts of religious paranoia. These episodes grew more frequent and severe after the deaths of her husband and nephew Pedro III, eldest son Joseph, Prince of Brazil, and confessor, culminating in a complete mental collapse. Contemporary accounts and letters paint a grim picture. She would scream through the palace corridors, convinced of damnation, unable to sleep, and refusing to bathe. Her doctors, including the renowned Dr. Francis Willis, who had treated King George III of Britain for his own episodes of madness, described her condition as a melancholia furens, a furious melancholy. While the exact medical diagnosis cannot be definitively made from centuries past, the severity and nature of her mental deterioration, combined with her highly inbred background, strongly suggest a genetic predisposition to severe psychiatric illness. Her condition effectively incapacitated her for the last 2 decades of her life, forcing her son, John VI, to rule as regent. The whispers among the courts were palpable. The Queen had succumbed to the family curse, a madness passed down through generations. Maria I's story is a harrowing testament to the unseen deformities that inbreeding could inflict. Unlike the unmistakable Habsburg jaw, her suffering manifested internally, a shattered mind cloistered within a queen's body. Her tragic reign and incapacitation were not merely personal misfortunes, but directly impacted the governance of Portugal, leaving a void of leadership at a critical juncture in European history. Her descent into madness wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a glaring, public indictment of a dynastic strategy that, in its pursuit of power, mercilessly sacrificed the health and sanity of its own. But how do we, centuries later, confirm the prevalence and impact of such hidden genetic curses? Her tragic reign and incapacitation were not merely personal misfortunes, but directly impacted the governance of Portugal, leaving a void of leadership at a critical juncture in European history. Her descent into madness wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a glaring, public indictment of a dynastic strategy that, in its pursuit of power, mercilessly sacrificed the health and sanity of its own. But how do we, centuries later, confirm the prevalence and impact of such hidden genetic curses? The evidence, like the stories themselves, often lies buried beneath layers of time and tradition, revealing itself through careful historical and increasingly scientific scrutiny. The process of unmasking this agony involves piecing together fragments from various historical records, much like forensic scientists reconstructing a crime scene. Our primary sources are often the most direct, official royal portraits. While these were generally idealized renderings, designed to project power and beauty, a careful eye can discern recurring physical eccentricities that hint at the genetic truth. The Habsburg jaw is the most prominent example, its progressive severity clearly visible across generations of paintings. Subtler cues might include unusual eye spacing, dental malocclusions beyond the jaw, or less robust builds that distinguish these features from typical artistic stylization. When dozens of portraits across centuries consistently show similar, peculiar features, it's a strong indicator of a hereditary trait, often a sign of reduced genetic diversity. Beyond the brushstrokes, we delve into the written word. Letters between monarchs, diplomats, and their courtiers often contain candid, if discreet, observations about the health and disposition of royal figures. Medical accounts, though rudimentary by modern standards, provide invaluable insights into the chronic ailments, developmental delays, and mental health struggles that plagued these individuals. Descriptions of weak constitutions, fits of melancholy, nervous disorders, or idiocy are euphemisms that, when read through a modern lens of genetic understanding, paint a chilling picture of inherited infirmities. Court chroniclers, while prone to flattery, sometimes recorded peculiar behaviors or physical limitations that again align with known consequences of inbreeding. Furthermore, a significant piece of evidence lies in the meticulously kept lineage records themselves. Royal genealogies, intended to establish legitimacy and inheritance, paradoxically reveal the alarming frequency of consanguineous marriages. By overlaying these family trees with recorded ailments, patterns emerge that are far too consistent to be coincidental. In more recent times, scientific advancements have added a chilling new dimension to this historical detective work. Where available, the forensic analysis of skeletal remains has provided concrete, incontrovertible evidence. For instance, the excavation and study of Habsburg skeletal remains have confirmed the presence and severity of the mandibular prognathism and other bone deformities. Beyond physical anthropology, the nascent field of paleogenomics, where DNA can be extracted from historical remains, holds the ultimate promise. While still challenging with ancient samples, future genetic studies could pinpoint the specific genetic mutations responsible for these ailments, providing definitive biological explanations for historical anecdotes. This scientific scrutiny transforms mere rumor into undeniable fact, unmasking the profound agony hidden behind centuries of regal silence. The accumulated evidence paints a grim picture, setting the stage for the inevitable consequences that would befall these royal lines. The story reaches its harrowing climax as the biological and psychological decay, cultivated over generations of inbreeding, finally culminates in a breaking point. For many of these inbred queens, the end was not a swift, dignified passing, but a protracted, agonizing decline, a public spectacle of suffering that mirrored the corruption at the heart of their dynastic strategies. Take, for instance, the climax of Maria I of Portugal's reign. Her initial periods of melancholy intensified into raving madness, her screams echoing through the palaces, a terrifying soundtrack to the unraveling of her mind. Eventually, she became completely incapacitated, a queen in name only, her responsibilities assumed by a regency council headed by her son. This public breakdown was not merely a personal tragedy. It deeply influenced Portuguese politics, creating instability and leaving the nation vulnerable at a crucial period in its history. Her suffering became a microcosm of the destructive cycle of royal inbreeding, the pursuit of power leading to madness, and ultimately mortality, both personal and political. This was not unique to Maria. Across Europe, when the physical deformities became too pronounced to ignore, or the mental instability too dangerous to conceal, a critical juncture was reached. Whether it was the death of the last, severely inbred Habsburg king, Charles II of Spain, whose genetic fragility famously led to the War of the Spanish Succession, or the pervasive illness and early deaths of heirs in the House of Bourbon, these climaxes often forced a re-evaluation, however reluctant, of the dynastic marriage policies. The chilling revelation was that the very practices designed to preserve and strengthen power were, in fact, undermining it, leading to diminished health, shortened lifespans, and, crucially, a succession crisis that threatened the very existence of the dynasties. The horror wasn't just in the physical deformities or the hereditary insanity. It was in the relentless, systemic nature of the problem. Congenital defects, once rare aberrations, became recurring family traits. The vigor and strength expected of rulers were systematically eroded by a self-imposed genetic chaos. Imagine the desperate whispers in the court, the hushed consultations between royal physicians, the agonizing realization that the next generation might be even more physically and mentally frail than the last. These were not simply unfortunate occurrences. They were the inevitable yield of centuries of genetic malpractice, a harvest of suffering sown by misplaced ambition. These points of no return, these climaxes of decay, often spurred a desperate search for fresh blood, encouraging marriages outside the immediate family circle. Yet, the legacy of genetic damage could not be undone overnight. The horror of what had been wrought, however, became undeniably clear. The pursuit of power at any cost had transformed proud lineages into fragile, often tormented, shadows of their former glory. These points of no return, these climaxes of decay, often spurred a desperate search for fresh blood, encouraging marriages outside the immediate family circle. Yet, the legacy of genetic damage could not be undone overnight. The horror of what had been wrought, however, became undeniably clear. The pursuit of power at any cost had transformed proud lineages into fragile, often tormented, shadows of their former glory. The profound impact of these royal women's suffering reverberated through the very fabric of European society, leaving a permanent mark on history and shaping the future of royal succession. The echoes of royal inbreeding continue to reverberate, serving as a grim warning etched into the annals of history, a potent reminder of the biological consequences of unchecked power and ambition. The decline and eventual collapse of some of these once mighty dynasties, directly linked to their compromised genetic health, forced a seismic shift in royal marriage policies across Europe. The lesson, painfully learned, was that maintaining dynastic purity at all costs was a self-defeating endeavor, leading not to strength, but to chronic fragility and ultimately extinction. While some royal houses, like the Habsburgs, did eventually cease to exist in their direct, inbred lines, others adapted. The later centuries saw a gradual, though not immediate, reduction in the frequency of first-cousin marriages among ruling families. Royal families began to cast their marital nets wider, forging alliances with more distant relatives or even entirely new houses, inadvertently injecting much-needed genetic diversity into their lineages. This shift wasn't a sudden awakening to genetic science, but a pragmatic response to repeated tragedies and the existential threats of a dying line. Today, with our advanced understanding of genetics and hereditary diseases, we can fully comprehend the biological mechanisms behind the suffering endured by these historical figures. What was once dismissed as divine curse or inexplicable illness is now understood as the predictable outcome of increased homozygosity, leading to the expression of harmful recessive alleles. Scientific studies of historical populations, and especially royal remains where possible, continue to shed light on specific medical conditions and the degree of consanguinity that led to them. This modern lens offers both a tragic confirmation of historical accounts and a deeper appreciation for the complex interplay between power, society, and biology. These dark histories are not mere macabre tales. They serve as profound warnings. They underscore the inherent dangers of unchecked power, where human lives become mere instruments for dynastic continuity, regardless of the suffering inflicted. They stand as a stark reminder against the destructive hubris of believing one can defy natural laws, in this case, genetic diversity, without consequence. Furthermore, they implicitly warn against any form of societal pressure or ideology that promotes isolationist breeding practices, whether for perceived purity of blood, class, or any other artificial construct. In their silence, the royal graves of Europe speak volumes. They tell tales of a twisted ambition that sacrificed health, sanity, and ultimately longevity for the illusion of perpetual power. They compel us to reflect on the tragic humanity behind these figures, women often trapped by circumstance and expectation, bearing the heaviest genetic burdens. Their lives, marked by physical ailment and mental anguish, are a haunting testament to the cost of greed, cruelty, and the profound neglect of fundamental human well-being. The pursuit of power at any cost, as these histories illustrate, can lead not just to political decay, but to a devastating biological and moral degradation that echoes through the ages. The concept of a cursed inheritance is not merely a poetic flourish when discussing the inbred royal women of history. It is a stark reality. These individuals inherited not only thrones and vast fortunes, but also an invisible burden of genetic predispositions that often manifested as physical afflictions, mental instability, and shortened lives. This tragic legacy served as a permanent scar, a grim reminder of the price paid for centuries of strategic, self-serving marital policies. Even in modern times, with the dissolution of many monarchies and a global understanding of genetics, the lessons from these inbred dynasties remain profoundly relevant. They stand as a powerful cautionary tale against any ideology or practice that seeks to limit genetic diversity for perceived purity or superiority. Whether it's historical eugenics movements or more subtle societal pressures that encourage endogamy within certain groups, the biological consequences of such practices are well documented. These royal histories highlight, in stark and dramatic terms, why genetic diversity is not just an abstract scientific concept, but a fundamental requirement for the health and resilience of any population, be it royal or common. Furthermore, the stories of these inbred queens underline the profound ethical dilemmas inherent in systems where human beings are treated as political commodities. These women were rarely given a choice in their marriages. Their bodies and reproductive capabilities were tools for dynastic survival. Their suffering, often endured in gilded cages and isolated from genuine human connection, exposes the moral bankruptcy of such arrangements. It reminds us of the critical importance of individual autonomy and well-being over abstract notions of power and legacy. In closing, as we step away from the shadows of these dark historical chapters, we are left with a haunting thought. The pursuit of power, when untempered by human empathy and foresight, can inflict wounds that span generations. The physical deformities, the mental anguish, the early demises, these were not random misfortunes but the direct, horrifying consequence of a world obsessed with maintaining control through bloodlines. The tragic saga of history's most inbred women is a timeless narrative, a chilling fable reminding us that true power cannot be amassed through biological impoverishment. Instead, it underscores the enduring truth that the pursuit of dominion at any cost often leaves behind not a glorious legacy, but a trail of profound human suffering and the indelible, cursed scar of misguided ambition.